A man accepts a demolition job and takes his daughter with him to the desert. Unbeknownst to the pair, the clients intend to involve them in a nefarious illegal scheme. Late one night, Scott and his wife Linda track their daughter's phone to a house party on the outskirts of town since she's 3 hours past her curfew. Before he gets out of the truck, the woman tells the husband not to do anything rash. However, the man grabs a rubber mallet from the toolbox and heads inside. He catches Jane, his daughter, making out with someone by the window. When she sees her father, the embarrassed teen asks what he's doing there. Scott says he's come to take her home because she's too young to be at these kinds of parties. Jane refuses to cooperate, so the father swings her over his shoulder, carries her to the truck, and places her in the back seat. Minutes later on the drive back, Linda tries to calm her husband and daughter down while they argue. The teen asks how they even found her, so the man reveals that they placed a tracker on her phone because she's always out late and never tells them where she is. Suddenly, a vehicle speeds past the family, angering Scott, who thinks the other driver intentionally cut him off. Later, they stop at a gas station to fill the tank, and the father immediately recognizes the truck at the adjacent pump. Linda begs her husband to stay in the vehicle, worried he might let his emotions get the best of him. However, Scott gets out of the truck, reasoning that he needs to do so to get gas. Moments later, he confronts the man for cutting him off earlier, explaining that his family was in the truck. Eventually, the wife and daughter get out of the vehicle to try and defuse the situation. Scott grabs the mallet and insists all he wants is an apology, but when the other driver inches closer, he pushes him away. Suddenly, the man pulls a gun out and a scuffle ensues. In the chaos, the weapon accidentally goes off, mortally wounding Linda, who falls to the ground. Panicked, Scott tells Jane to call an ambulance, but the gunshot noise causes the teen to lose her hearing. 1 year later, the father practices sign language inside his truck. Then, he speaks to Jane's doctor, who says there hasn't been any changes to his daughter's hearing and refusal to speak. The man shows the physician a cochlear implant that might double the teen's hearing and give her a shot at a normal life. So the doctor calmly explains that his daughter's refusal to speak might still be trauma from the incident, but adds that he realistically can't afford the implant procedure because it's $30,000. She tells the man to stop rejecting the idea of learning sign language because it's the most practical means of communication for Jane. When he tries to talk to the teen, she flips him off and treats him with disdain, implying a strained relationship following Linda's death. Soon, they arrive at Scott's demolition service business, but before he goes inside, he asks Jane if she'd like to join him on a fishing trip that weekend because he doesn't feel comfortable leaving her at home alone. The daughter reminds her father that she is old enough, but he counters that it could be the start of a new family tradition. Later, the man's employee, Pablo, informs him that he has a customer waiting in the office. Inside, Victor, or Vic, introduces himself and says he's there for a demolition job on behalf of his friend. He says the friend lost his house to his ex-wife during the divorce and he wants Scott to strip it clean because he technically still owns everything inside. At first, the man turns down the job because he has plans for the weekend, so Vic says he can keep all the fixtures from the house, then places 3 bundles of cash amounting to $30,000 on the table, and adds that he'll get another $10,000 once the job's done. Since he needs the money to fund Jane's cochlear implant procedure, Scott finally accepts the offer. As they finalize the deal, Vic says the job is to strip and dig only, emphasizing that they leave the walls alone. Meanwhile, the teen watches the two men shake in agreement and then spots Vic's girlfriend Lola standing outside the establishment. 2 days ago, Vic answered a call from a friend who informed him that someone's about to move into the house in the desert. He asked if it had anything to do with Lola's cousin because he's already taken care of him. Then, the friend says he'll send Vic the details of a local contract that'll get the job done as soon as possible. After the call, Vic told the tied-up man that they wouldn't need him anymore and shot him. Lola heard the noise and proudly reminded her boyfriend that he promised she'd kill the next one. Vic told the woman they needed to return to the desert, which she wasn't happy about. In the present, Jane reveals that she reads their lips through the window and that they won't go fishing. So Scott says it's good money that they can use for her implant procedure. The daughter points out that they won't need her for the job, but he insists coming along and helping him and Pablo out will do her some good. That afternoon, they take the truck and a camper to the desert so they won't need to drive back home every day. When they arrive, Pablo remarks how strange it is for the dilapidated house to have such a nice patio. Inside, Scott checks the faucet and the light switches and deduces the utilities were shut off. Suddenly, a homeless teen runs out of a room hoping to escape. The father pins him to the wall and asks what he's doing there. The trespasser, who introduces himself as Tommy, says he was only looking for a place to sleep. Scott tells Pablo to call the police. police, but upon seeing the teen begging them not to, the sympathetic Jane asks her father to reconsider. Later, they feed Tommy and he confides that he ran away from home because there's a warrant for his arrest for stealing a car. When he learns that Jane doesn't like working with her father, Tommy tells her not to take her time with Scott for granted. Before he leaves, the teen thanks the family for not calling the cops and for the meal. Then, he opens a lockbox of knickknacks he picked up on the road and gives Jane a necklace with a small pocket knife pendant. Hours later, the group proceeds to strip the house of all removable fixtures. When Scott hears his daughter using a sledgehammer on the wall, he quickly tells her to stop because leaving the walls intact was one of the client's specific instructions. She asks if she messed up, so the father assures her that everything's okay. After the teen steps away for a moment, Scott wordly tells Pablo that Jane's mistake might have cost them the contract. Seconds later, the employee shows the man a thick bundle of money he pulled from inside the wall. He thinks they're in a stash house and that they should inform the authorities. However, Scott reminds Pablo that the client knows who he is, then says he'll go into town to buy supplies so they can plaster the wall and pretend they didn't see anything. That evening, after purchasing all the supplies, the father contemplates calling the police but ultimately decides against it. When he returns to the house, he's surprised to find Jane tied up with a gag over her mouth. Suddenly, a man and a woman wearing ski masks threaten to shoot him unless he surrenders his keys and wallet and gets down on his knees. Distraught, the father says he can't believe it's happening all over again. He asks why his daughter's cheeks all bloody, and the captor explains that they had to hit her a few times because she wasn't listening to their instructions. So Scott tells him that it's because she can't hear. The father thinks the masked man is the client's friend who lost the house and the divorce. However, he doesn't confirm the allegation and reveals that they needed the cover-up of a salvage crew before the excavation team arrived. Because they showed up with the necessary machinery and tools, the neighbors won't bother to investigate the noise anymore. Suddenly, Pablo, who managed to wriggle out of his binds, tries to make a run for it. Unfortunately, the armed woman shoots and kills him. Just as they're about to finish off the two other hostages, Scott points out that they can't afford to lose them because they'll need their expertise when handling the machinery and tools. The masked pair, who's revealed to be Vic and Lola, move to the kitchen to have a private conversation. The woman thinks they need to stick to the original plan and dig up the patio themselves. However, her boyfriend reminds her that it was her cousin who dug it up last time and they had to kill him. He thinks it's best to let the professionals handle it, especially since they could risk the excavation team finding, in 2 days, what they hid under the patio. After the captives clean up Pablo's blood from the floor, Vic notices the father using sign language, so he threatens to break the teen's hands unless they stick to lip reading from now on. Later, Scott asks the masked man what's under the patio, and the latter says all he needs to know is that whatever it is all he wants, adding that he'll even let the captive keep all the money in the walls once the job's done. By the campfire, Vic orders Jane to make him coffee, so the teen heads inside the camper. Minutes later, Scott reveals that he knows who he is, prompting the captors to finally remove their masks. Then, the armed man remembers him saying that he can't believe it's happening to them again and wonders what he meant. So the father shares how he lost his wife and how his daughter became deaf that fateful night 1 year ago. The pair asks if he blames his daughter for Linda's death. Unbeknownst to Scott, Jane reads his lips and sees him answer yes. However, he admits that he too played a part in everything that happened that night that led to his wife's demise. Angry and heartbroken, the teen tosses the coffee at the couple. Furious, they point their weapons at her, so Scott begs them not to hurt Jane. Eventually, after everyone calms down, Vic locks the father and daughter in the camper to make sure they don't escape in the night. The next day, the grumpy teen confronts Scott for saying what he said last night, so he tries to explain that he didn't mean any of it. Suddenly, she barges out of the camper, past the armed couple, and tries to run away. To get her to stop, Vic fires his gun, missing Jane by a few inches. Then, he threatens to end her father's life if she tries to escape again. Later, the armed man tells Scott that he doesn't want to hurt him or his daughter because he's a family man himself. He adds that the father reminds him of his brother who graduated from Texas State University. He shares that whenever they got into an argument, his brother would knock his school ring on the table to remind Vic that he has a degree. Then, Scott remarks that he now knows who the black sheep of the family is, annoying the captor. He says his brother's dead, but when the hostage asks how he died, Vic refuses to answer. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Lola tells Jane that her boyfriend was soft when they first met and that he always let his college-educated brother walk all over him. She adds that it took a while to toughen him up, which is why he is the way he is now. Then, she insists on putting makeup on the teen's face, and while doing so, tells Jane how lucky she is to have a father. The woman shares that she only saw her father twice her whole life, when she was born and when he took advantage of her as a teen. Later that day, a utility locator arrives to mark the lines before the excavation crew gets in, so Vic orders Scott to speak to the man, making sure he doesn't raise any suspicions while he holds Jane at gunpoint in the camper. Even though he knows the captor's listening in through a Bluetooth earpiece, Scott tries to steer the conversation with a utility contractor to possibly calling 911. Unfortunately, the clueless man doesn't understand what he's trying to say, and after he leaves, the irate Vic threatens to shoot the teen. To calm the armed man down, the father says he got rid of the utility contractor just like they wanted. Eventually, the father and daughter return to work, breaking down the concrete patio and digging up the dirt underneath. Concurrently, in the camper, the couple argue about whose fault it is that they're in their current predicament. Lola reminds him that his brother tried to kill her, and she worries if they move the object under the patio to a different location, someone else is gonna find it. After the spat, the girlfriend initiates intimacy, and when Jane sees the preoccupied captors, she uses sign language to tell Scott that it's their only chance to escape. Minutes later, Lola realizes that it's gotten quiet, and when they go to check, find their hostages missing. Meanwhile, the father and daughter reach the main road, and they flag down the first vehicle that comes along. Unfortunately, it's the captors, and when Scott begs them to let him and his child go, Vic says they still need to finish the job. Defeated, the father and the teen get on the truck and join the couple back to the house. Inside, the sadistic pair punishes Scott by tying him up and punching him repeatedly. Seconds later, Lola places a gag over Jane's mouth and slams the gun on her hand. Later that night, the oblivious Tommy returns to the house and finds Pablo's body. He enters the work tent over the patio and the couple points their guns at him. Scott tells the pair to let him go, but despite the drifters' desperate pleas for mercy, Lola shoots him in the head. Eventually, after hours of digging, they reach a large wooden crate, and Scott points out the putrid smell emanating from the box. They carry it inside, and when the father sees the Texas State University ring roll out, deduces that it contains Vic's brother's corpse. Lola commends her boyfriend for standing up to his brother, especially when he tried to kill him and steal his girl and money. However, Vic recalls her saying that his brother tried to kill her as well, so she quickly corrects herself. Scott scoffs and asks the armed man if he actually believes his girlfriend, which he says doesn't seem like the sharing type. Since they've unearthed their brother's body, the couple decide it's time they find a new location to dump everyone they've killed, including the father and daughter, so Lola takes Scott and Jane outside. But just as she's about to pull the trigger, Vic calls her over. The suspicious boyfriend asks the woman if his brother tried to kill her because he's wondered for some time that they might have had a relationship. Meanwhile, the teen apologizes for sneaking out that night and admits she blames herself for what happened to her mother. However, Scott tells her that it wasn't her fault and that they need to forgive each other and themselves. Concurrently, Lola admits that she slept with Vic's criminal brother and father, which is why she feels entitled to the money in the house. She adds that she saved the man from his family and that he should be thanking her. Surprisingly, Vic doesn't care that the woman manipulated him into killing his brother, and even says that it only proves that she's the person he wants to marry. While the couple kiss, Scott and Jane try to run away, so the armed man shoots the father. Vic steps on the injury to inflict even more pain, while Lola beats the daughter up. Suddenly, the teen remembers the pocket knife pendant, so she uses it to slice the woman's throat. Distraught, the boyfriend cries as he cradles the dying Lola in his arms. Scott and Jane run to the truck, but before they drive off, the vengeful man pulls the father out of the vehicle and slams the door on his body several times. A scuffle ensues, with Vic having the upper hand. Determined to save her father, the teen speaks for the first time in a year and calls out to him. After a split second of surprise, Scott pushes the armed man off him and kicks his leg so he falls to the ground, thus allowing the daughter to run him over with a truck and into the shed. Seconds later, the man assures the traumatized daughter that everything's alright, and she says she loves him. As the sun rises on the horizon, the pair drive back to town with bundles of cash on the dashboard.